I commend the young men for what they did tonight, getting up and leading. I remember the first time that I stood in front of a crowd of people, and it was about 20 or 30 times smaller than this, and I was still scared to death, and I know that it's not an easy thing. I commend those that are working with them. I commend the young men that have gotten up to lead. This is not only the future of the church, but y'all are a part of the church now, and we are blessed and thankful to have you. We need men to rise up. There is perhaps a leadership crisis that persists, and yet this kind of thing is how we fight against it. So tonight I'm going to do a lesson from Psalm 127. And we just read through it. It has to do with the home, it has to do with the Lord helping us to build the home, and it has to do with the enemies of the Lord that exist and how it is that He would have us to overcome them. You'll notice a number of these psalms. This was not only Israel's songbook, this was the early church's songbook, and the church is commanded in Ephesians chapter 5, and we are commanded in Ephesians chapter 5 to sing these. And thematically, they are very heavily centered on worship and very heavily centered on warfare. And these two things go hand in hand. We are in a battle. And the Bible reiterates the point over and over and over and over and over again. Paul in Ephesians chapter 6, he says, we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but we wrestle against the rulers and against the authorities and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Therefore, take up the full armor of God, that you may be able to withstand. And having done all, to stand firm. And then he tells us about these different aspects that we're to endow ourselves with. Before we get into the psalm, I want to read Deuteronomy chapter 6, just the first handful of verses. So if you have your Bible, I'm just going to read this out of my Bible. Deuteronomy chapter 6, and we will begin in verse 1. Now this is the commandment, the statutes, and the rules that the Lord your God commanded me to teach you, that you may do them in the land to which you are going over, to possess it, that you may fear the Lord your God, you and your son and your son's son, by keeping all his statutes and commandments which I command you all the days of your life, and that your days may be long. Hear therefore, O Israel, and be careful to do them, that it may go well with you, and that you may multiply greatly, as the Lord, the God of your fathers, has promised you, in a land flowing with milk and honey. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. I could read the entirety of the chapter, and so much of it has to do with this reminder to fathers, for their sons, and for their grandsons about the things that God has done. And there would be an eventual day when the sons would say, what is this? What does this mean? What is this all about? And you would remind them that God was a powerful God who took us by the hand out of the land of Egypt, and He brought us into this land. And God wanted that to be reminded. He wanted it to be a memorial. He wanted it to be something that was talked about. The things of God, when you sit down and when you stand up, when you're going down the road and when you're lying down in bed, to put it on the doorposts of your house, to put it between your eyes, to wrap it around your wrists. The things of the living God, put them before you all the time. Put them before your sons, put them before your sons' sons. The building block of society is the family. This culture is doing everything that it possibly can to say that the building block of society is the individual. And this isn't true. And the way in which all of us participate in this is all of us are part of families. We have different roles within those homes. Some of us are sons, some of us are daughters, some of us are husbands, some of us are wives, some are mothers, some are fathers, some are aunts, some are uncles, some are grandmothers and grandfathers, and cousins, and the list goes on. But the basic unit of society is the home. It is the household. It is, more specifically, the family. And if we're considering the family, the family has a cosmological basis. That is, the structure of the family echoes out into the cosmos. There's significance in the ordering of the home. Paul argues cosmologically in Ephesians chapter 5 and Ephesians chapter 6 that marriage as a unit isn't just two people living in a domestic situation, having signed a document together, but that husband and wife are actually representative of a much deeper reality, namely that of God and his people, or that of Jesus and the church. And he says, this goes back to the very beginning, this is why the unit is to remain intact, because it's representative of God and his people, and Jesus and his church. Children are representative of the fruitfulness that comes from that. When God and his people are working in tandem, fruit is born, disciples are made, the world is changed. Things are made to be good here on this earth when God and his people are working in tandem. So there's a cosmological basis for the family. There is an economic basis for the family. In fact, until yesterday, and by yesterday I mean the Industrial Revolution, it was understood the family as a unit, the household, was considered to be the basis of the economy. I want to write down a word for you on screen. Economia. And if I'm going to put it in regular lettering, it looks like this. And that looks kind of like economy. The word economy that we understand, we think of economy, we just think of it as sort of this nebulous, it's just numbers, it's just finances, it's, the ups and downs of the stock market, it's business and all of these monetary exchanges, and that's what economy is. And yet economy is a Greek word, it's a compound Greek word that means house law. The law of the house, the code of the house. And the reason why it's our word for the monetary goings-on that we have in our world is because for ages, for literal ages, in fact, for all of history, prior to the Industrial Revolution, the basis of the economy was the intact household. It was mom and dad and children and grandma and granddad and all these families working together as a system, and they were close together. And then the Industrial Revolution came along, and with that, the job was taken from the home. And the man went to the factory, and then the wife was left at home. And then she eventually got bored, so she went to a job out in society. And then the kids went another direction. And since that has happened, what has happened society-wide is, whereas the family used to be such a tight-knit group where everyone was together, they were working together, they were thinking together, they were being trained together, boys were mentored and brought up under father, children were mentored and brought up under mother, what has happened since then is there's been a dispersion, and we've separated, and we've all gone our different ways. And society has impressed upon us this idea that the basic building block of society is the individual. And we're seeing what kinds of things happen when individualism rises to the very top. But when you look in Scripture, the basis of the of the society and the basis of the economy is the family. There's even a biological basis for the family. Mother, father, children, and that's just its very generic shape that it takes on. But it's interesting how when we lost the cosmological perspective, how soon afterwards the economic perspective fell, and then soon after even the biological perspective has fallen. You can see how everything has gone into a kind of disarray. And so here we are in 2024, and we're being tasked by the living God with really a monumental task. And he's telling us to go out into the world and to change the world. We were watching a movie the other day. It was Wonka. I don't know how many saw the new one. I thought it was quite good. The young man I thought was much more relatable than the Johnny Depp version some years ago. But there was this one line in it that I thought was such a good line. This young lady was talking about how the greedy always take advantage of the needy, and that's just the way that it is. And this young Wonka character, he said, yeah, it is. So all we need to do is just change the world and make it to where it's not that way anymore. Right? That's all we need to do. We're looking around and we see the things that are in disarray, and really what God has tasked us with is actually quite simple. It is within our grasp. It is uncomplex. In fact, it's the most ancient of all things. And I'm asking the question tonight is, what is it that we are to do? How does God commission us today in 2024 to be the light for the world, to give direction for the world? Where can we start? What can we do? And the answer is simply that we start in our home. We start in our home. Whether you're a mother or a father or neither of those things. Maybe you're a brother or a sister. Maybe you're a cousin. Maybe you're an aunt. Maybe you're just a son or a daughter. Whatever capacity it is that you exist, and all of us exist in some capacity as a member of a family, we are being called to certain things. And this, by obedience to what God is calling us to, this is how we not only change the world, this is how we defeat the enemy that has been encroaching for so long. It's an uncomplex answer. It's a simple answer. It does not mean that it will be easy to do, but I want for you to see what this psalm is calling for us to do. There are many theologians and scholars and persons, social commentators today that are looking out at what's happening. They're looking out, and it's everybody can easily say, well, all of these systems have collapsed, right? All of the different, whether it's politics or education or business or just our societal virtue, it's all collapsed, and it's really easy. It doesn't matter which side of the aisle you're on. It doesn't matter who you are. It's really easy to look and say, see, there's a big problem. And it's also easy to maybe throw out some answer. Here's a simple solution. But we have to be careful that we don't. C.S. Lewis warned about handing out fire extinguishers in the middle of a flood. And there's a tendency to look out and say, well, we just got to do something, so let's go do something. And then we just throw out all these foolish, baseless ideas. And what I'm saying is, what we need to have eyes to come to the Word of God and say, oh, there it is. That's what He's calling us to do. That He says it right here. In fact, He doesn't just say it here. He says it throughout the entirety of the Bible, and it's right there. But we have to come with fresh eyes and a willingness to reconsider forms, customs, habits, and ideas perhaps that we've had prior to this point. We do not want to hand out fire extinguishers in a flood. That would not be helpful. But this is what this psalmist is telling us to do. We just quickly read through it, and I'm going to highlight a couple of words that show you that this is a psalm about how to deal with enemies. The reason why enemies comes up so often on Sunday nights when I'm talking about the Psalms is because it comes up all the time in the Psalms. It's not like I'm just trying to pick, hey, I just want to talk all the time about enemies. But this is in keeping with our Lord and Savior Jesus, who spoke of enemies quite often. I know that there are some Christians who are reticent to admit that we even have enemies, but it's important to note that Jesus didn't call us to have none. He called us to love the ones that we do have. We do have them. They do exist. They're enemies because they are enemies of God. And I'll remind you that you and I once also were enemies of God. We talked about that this morning. We were once enemies of God in the same vein. Perhaps ignorant enemies. Certainly we were. Perhaps there was, it's not necessarily that there was animosity or that there was a striving to be combative, but that was the nature of things because of the lies that we had bought. Now we're sons of God, and the world, the broader world that is still under the influence of Satan, that is the enemy. So what do we do? How do we deal with them? Well, we love them, number one, but this is how we love them. This psalm is about what that ultimately looks like on a society-wide level. Unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches, let me make mine a little bigger here. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchman stays awake in vain. So this psalmist is saying that God, you need to have God on your side looking out over the city. And not just over the city, but over what's beyond the city. That's what a watchman does. And the watchman's purpose wasn't to get up and watch the sunrise. His purpose wasn't to stay up late and watch the sun set. Of course, that doesn't happen very late, but the purpose of the watchman was to watch for enemies. And the psalmist is saying, we want God to be the one doing that. He said, it's in vain that you rise up early and go late to rest, eating the bread of anxious toil. It would be in vain if God wasn't participant in it. For he gives to his beloved sleep. We can go to sleep at night and we can be just fine. And he says, behold, children are a heritage from the Lord, the fruit of the womb a reward. Now notice this language. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior are the children of one's youth. Blessed is the man who fills his quiver with them. Okay? So we see a watchman who's staying awake to watch the city. And then next you see this idea of having children and this concept of arrows and a warrior and filling your quiver with children. And then he says, such a person shall not be put to shame when he speaks with his enemies in the gate. This is a psalm about how to overcome the enemies. And again, the thing that strikes me about this is the nature of the psalm is not violent in nature. We're talking about enemies. We're talking about a watchman over a city. And yet, the information within this psalm is subtle, and it's shockingly simple. And you're questioning, you're asking, what is it that you're saying that I'm to be doing? How is it that I fight against the enemy? What do I do? And the answer has to do with what you're doing in your house. The answer has to do with what you do inside the four walls of your home. The answer has to do with how it is that you are interacting within your family unit. No matter what position in the family it is that you are fulfilling, that's really what's being spoken of. And he says, when he says he shall not be put to shame when he speaks with his enemies in the gate, what he's saying is the enemy will not prevail over your city. You will not be put to shame. If the Lord is watching over the city for you, and if the Lord has built the home, which we're going to look at here in just a second, then the enemy will not prevail against you. That's really what this is about. And to me, this goes hand in hand with what Paul says in the New Testament. He says, the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh. Your version might say they are not carnal. They are not physical swords. But they have the ability to bring down strongholds and to destroy arguments and to destroy any lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of Jesus Christ. It's not that we don't fight, but we fight in a completely different way. And that's what this psalm is about. So I want to give you just a couple of tips as to what it is that he's saying that we're supposed to do. The first one is here in verse 1. He says, unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchman stays awake in vain. Now, notice the order there. Which of these came first? Is God the God of a city first? Or is God the God of a home first? The way in which God becomes the God of a city, wherein that city is afforded some kind of protection, is that there would be people and family units within it that are godly. That's how God is actively participant in protecting a place. And this echoes back to the story, you remember, of Lot. Remember, in Sodom and Gomorrah was wicked to its core. And God was on the verge of destroying it. And yet, what was it that kept God's protection over it for a time? It was that Lot was within it. Righteous Lot, it calls him. He was within the city. So, it's important to note that it goes in this order. It starts in the home, and if there are godly homes, then there will be godly cities. And God will look after the city, and it goes in that order. One of my very first sermons, actually, it was literally my very first sermon, before I was even hired to come here and be your preacher, I came and I spoke on a Sunday night from Matthew chapter 5, where Jesus said, "You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor does anybody take a lamp in a house and put it under a basket." And I don't know if you remember, but that night I was talking about the way in which we be the light to the whole world, which is what? Light up your bedroom. Have a light in your bedroom. Have a light in your living room. Be a light in your home. And if enough Christians would do that, being a light in the home, then that spreads and it just pans out. And then soon enough, you've got more godly homes, and there's lights within them. And you get a collection of those. Soon enough, you have a city, and the city is lit up. And then soon enough, you have a city that's so noticeable that the world takes notice. And they look in and they say, well, what is it that's happening there at Abilene? What is it that's happening there at Oldham Lane? What is it that's happening in their homes? And then they take notice. And all of a sudden, we have a presence in the world that is undeniable. It begins in the home and then it works out. And the psalmist is saying the same thing. But he says, but unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain. And the question that I want to ask to the fathers, the patriarchs, the father rulers, which is consistent through all of the Bible, my question is, in your homes, who's building it? Who's building your home? And by virtue of him saying, those who build it, if the Lord is not the one building it, he says those who build it labor in vain. So the idea is that it's possible to spin our wheels. It's possible to just be kind of doing things off the cuff. And so the question that we have to ask, and the question I'm challenging you all with, is to go back to the drawing board and say, is the Lord building my house? Is the Lord building it? And the way that you answer that is, you say, well, if the Lord were to build my house, what if God were to take the roof off of your house, to descend into your home for a moment, and he were to come to speak to you, he husband, wife, family unit, and he was to say, these are the things that I want. What is it that he would require? What is it that he would ask for? What influences would he say are necessary, and what influences would he say ought not be there? what instruction would he be promoting? If God was to completely take the reins over the home, what would God do? What changes would be made? How would we structure ourselves as households? That's what this is about. And so he's saying, if the Lord builds the house, it will be a fruitful house. But if the Lord does not build the house, those who build it labor in vain. Now, if we'll do that, he says, the city is what follows. Now, here's my question. Per this psalm, it's a practical question, how do you get enough Christian households to where all of a sudden the whole city is now taken for God? What does he say? Well, he gives an answer. It's a simple answer. It's one that I think that the world would look at and maybe they would scoff at, and they would mock it, and they would say that it was silly. And this is something about thinking outside of you. It's always we always want to jump to the big end thing. I want to be the one that just changes the whole world. But the fact is, it's not going to happen like that. The way that it's going to happen is by saying, I'm going to change my home. I'm going to change my family. I'm going to change the way I talk to my wife. I'm going to change the way that I talk to my husband. I'm going to change the way that I talk to my kids. I'm going to change the influences that are influencing them. I'm going to change the kinds of books that we read. I'm going to change the kinds of films that we watch. I'm going to make it such that God would be participant in this. And most of the Christian walk, now I want to make this point. You read through the Bible, and we read through the Bible oftentimes. I saw this great little quote the other day, and I would butcher it if I tried to quote it exactly the same way, but it was a stellar point, and so I'm just going to recapture what he was saying. We read through the Bible, and we often think, because what we read is the main characters. We read Moses and Noah and Joseph and Paul and Peter and all. Those are the main characters. And we walk away thinking, well, I'm supposed to be sort of this rootless cosmopolitan that just does these amazing, huge things all on my own. But that's only because we're only reading the main characters and we're not looking at the characters to whom they were speaking. The vast majority of the people in the Bible were just living quiet lives in their cities and in their towns, faithfully worshiping God in their homes and plodding along. That's it. That's what the vast majority of us are called to be doing. It is not some earth-shattering, earth-shaking giant things. We're just called to say, I'm going to start right here where I'm standing. I'm going to resolve, no matter whether I'm a son or a daughter, or a mother or a father, or a grandma or I'm just going to resolve to be a light right here in my house. God, please help me change the way I speak. Please help me to have more patience. Help me to be more loving. Help me to be more intentional. If I'm a father, I'm going to make worship very central in our home. We're going to worship together because all of life is centered around worship. That's how you develop a godly culture. The word cultus means worship. Culture is not a secular, neutral ground. It worships something. Every culture worships something. But in my home, it's going to be God. And he gives this surprising answer. And this is I'm just generally giving this because the Bible generally gives it. This is not going to apply to every single individual. Sometimes we say, well, don't preach a lesson if it doesn't apply to every individual. Well, then how do you preach, the commands to mothers? Lots of us will never be mothers. A huge percentage of the world never will be. And yet, the command is still there, and we still look at what's being said. It's a simple one, but this is what he says. He says, like arrows in the hand of a warrior are the children of one's youth. Let me just highlight that. The children of one's youth. Blessed is the man who fills his quiver with them. He, that man, he shall not be put to shame when he speaks with his enemies in the gate. Here's what the Bible's saying. If we want to change the culture and the world and overcome this encroaching, hostile, secular entity, have lots of babies and make them Christians. That's what this word says. It's not complex, and it need not be. What it requires is I'm going to, just from where I'm standing with what I've been given, and again, it may not apply to everyone, and that's okay. But with what I've been given from God, I'm going to do this if I can, and if the Lord bestows it upon me to do it. Have lots of babies and make them Christians. And the fortunate thing is, right now, we're living in a world that has relegated children into this category of being nuisances, that they've completely missed what it says here and what every parent knows. They're a blessing. They're a rich blessing. They are good. Children are good. Blessed is the man who has them. Thank God for them. They give our lives so much humor and value and meaning. They are good. And because the world views them so negatively, the world has stopped having them. Or the world only has one. Or instead they say, we will have none, we will just have dogs. And so what I'm saying is, now's the time that Christians, we could change the world in a generation. Have children and raise them up in the Lord. And if you're not given that ability from God, then within your unit, resolve to say, God, I'm going to be what you've called me to be. If I'm a son, I'm going to honor mother and father. I will be godly toward them, and that household then will be godly. Whatever you are, whoever you are, wherever it is that the Lord has put you, we are called to honor the living God with his words. And with that, let's stand and let's sing.